All right, want to call the meeting to order. I'll entertain a motion to approve the meeting agenda. Excuse me.
I will make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Action items. The big one on the list is the 5-year plan of finance. Mr. Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the board. We are here today to seek your endorsement of the 5-year plan of finance. With us today is David Rose and AJ Allen from Davenport, our financial advisors. I think it's been 4 years since they've actually been here physically to present to you. So we thought this would be a great opportunity for them to come and speak with you all. So with that, I will turn things over to David and AJ.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me now? Is everyone okay? Again, on behalf of AJ and Courtney, who is recovering from some planned surgery, I'm here today. Much delighted to be here. Let me start by saying everyone should have a copy of our book. If not, I can make sure. Everyone, Carlos? Okay, all righty. And of course, just interrupt me or stop me at any time. There's an old saying my late father said, when you're explaining, you're losing, and we don't have a lot of explaining to do. And I think the numbers and the history will bear this out. So basically, I'm going to do this here. Should I just press it?
Michael's pulling up the presentation.
Okay. All right, I'll wait for a second then.
The presentation is the same.
Yes, it's what's in your book. Yeah.
This is for us to write notes on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. If you want to take it home and look at it later.
All right. There.
Yeah.
Are they pulling it up? Is that
Yes.
okay? All right.
Yeah, I only got 4A on.
Maybe I should, if you're okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll just continue. And all right, since we've got, I think most people. So on page 1, the question is, what is the 5-year plan? And this is a plan that has been done for a number of years and continues, of course, to be adjusted on a regular basis. And you'll see that in a few moments. But I feel as if this plan, going back to the days when Carla was in Brian's seat, has really put you in good stead. It's given the opportunity for both the Finance Committee and then ultimately the full board to really monitor what's happening year to year. So you can see there, I don't think I need to belabor it, what the full model has. It's really the plan of finance. And it also gives us especially the ability to see what looks like going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years. So allows us to do the planning. So if you go to next page, page 2, how does this all come together to be the plan of finance? And you can see those basically the 3 ellipticals there. We look at capital spending and CIP that's provided to us, operating budget provided to us, and then the rates, both the user rates and availability charges, all get rolled up into one, into what we'll call the plan of finance. And we're going to talk about that. As I think all of you know, since this is a seasoned group I'm in front of, but nevertheless, if you think about it, if things change dramatically like they did with regard to COVID, this gives us an opportunity to, again, to not have to reverse course without realizing how it might trend. Okay, next page. In this 5-year plan that we're going to address today, the 23 to 27 fiscal years, a couple of important things have happened. No surprise to you, I'm sure, given inflation and what have you. But you'll notice here that first bullet point, versus where we were a year ago when the plan, I'm sure, was presented by Brian, it's up almost $160 million. And that's an important point. I think the other important point is that the way in which you've operated is why I'm so positive about your management. All of that, nevertheless, is not earth-shattering in terms of what it means to absorb all of that. I think that's the impressive thing, is that you're able to absorb that increase, and you're going to see that in a few minutes. Why are those increases? You can see right there on that second bullet point. And finally, the last couple of bullet points here, when we've done the plan, when you've put these assumptions together, the folks that are to my right, they've been conservative. We've always been that way. So inevitably, we have better information resulting than what we typically expect. So very strong. Okay, next page. Some additional considerations. In fiscal year 2026, there's only a singular bond issue. Who knows? What I mean by that is, historically, we've always had some bond issues plugged in. Inevitably, those things have probably been slower to happen because your overall conservatism has been such that in reality, the need to do some bonding historically has been a little bit less, taken longer in a good way. But nevertheless, it's plugged in to this. I will tell you, if things go the opposite way, if somehow, for some reason, some of those expected connections do not occur and we need to do some more borrowing, we're able to do that comfortably. And you're going to see that in some of the ratios and some of the important things a little bit later on. So with all of that said, you may recall that we have a very strong cash level policy, and we'll show that a little bit later. But basically, it's equal to 2 times for a given year the cash levels, and we're above that, and we expect to be at or above that into the foreseeable future. So last thing, again, this is my point. Historically, your budget, you've come in better than your budget. And that's, again, why I think we are able to take care of some of these surprises. All right, next page. The one thing the rating agencies have said in the literally 40 years that I've been fortunate to work with you is they've always noticed the reliance on availability charges. Obviously, at one point, Loudoun County was the fastest growing county in the country. It has always done well that way, and yet the growth has been sustainable. It continues now, particularly with the data centers. But the upshot is, when you created that improved and new policy back in 2018, you said there that you're going to have at least 1 times coverage of all the debt, excluding availability charges. You can see right below there, you're anywhere from 2 to 2.5 times in that 5-year period. So you're well above the policy, which is a very good, strong point. And then the last policy, the second policy, I should say, debt service with the availability charges, you're basically 3 to 4 times above that policy. And that is, again, relative to folks out there nationally, highly ranked, that's really high. It's really putting us in a good position should surprises occur. So I want to
Just real quick, so our 1X, that the first one, that's not including availability charges.
Yeah,
We're
correct.
2 to 2.6, and then with availability charges, 4 to 5.
Yeah, and that's 1.5x too, exactly.
Okay.
So it's a higher bar.
Oh, I didn't even see that.
Yep.
Yep.
And it's been that way for many years. So again, the idea of being at 4 is so strong. And that's, again, it speaks to the fact that the amount of debt that you have relative to the overall operations is very modest.
So would it be accurate to say that if we had no availability charges come in next year or the year after that, we're saying that our current revenue would cover debt service for up to 2 years? Or am I not quite, that's not an accurate?
It's not quite, but what it says, here's the point, and you'll see this a little bit later. If we have no availability charges, our actual cash balances will come down rapidly. And so, from my perspective, knowing the history, it's difficult to conceive of all of a sudden going to no availability charges.
Not very reasonable.
Even in the worst of the worst, over 40 years, we still had hundreds of availability charges coming through even in awful years.
But this coverage then is not based on revenue, it's based on cash that we have in the bank or what?
No, it's actually based on revenue. It's based upon the actual operations of the system in a given year.
Okay,
But the point is that let's assume that you have this Armageddon situation. And the other point I'd always like to make, and Carla made this and her colleagues have always made this, if we see something like that happening, we also have the ability within reason to slow down some of our capital spending. Now, we may not be able to slow it down in 3 months, meaning if something is really already in the pipeline, but we've always been able to adjust and to monitor that. So from that perspective, it's not really even a full picture of showing that, again, cash would be depleted. There really is that opportunity to both adjust the capital program. So, because you have more, as you know, more than one project certainly going at any given time that you're constantly.
but just so I'm
spending.
understanding this correctly,
Yeah.
we're this 2 times and so forth. We're saying that net revenue is 2 times our debt service?
Exactly. It's twice what the debt service, we try to be at least 1 times coverage, have
Yep.
taken care of everything. We're twice that level
So
under
no
this.
availability charges, debt service is $100,000 a year, we've got $200,000 a year in net revenue excluding availability charges.
That's correct.
Okay,
Way to look at. Yes, sir.
Let me ask a question about that. Is
Yeah.
that typical that there's that much, I'm speaking from a banker and saying covenants and so forth, that's a lot of room before that goes down to 1.
It is.
We see that somewhere that something's happening that, before you start getting, once you get to 1, you're gonna keep going.
So interesting. The rating agencies, I've got to hear a little bit of commentary about the rating agencies, and they talk about how strong that coverage is. They make that point that you have
Is that
very
too
strong. No, I would not say too strong. I don't look at it that way, and I'll tell you why I say this. I look at your neighbors to the east, Fairfax County and Fairfax, I'll call it Fairfax Water and the water and sewer system and what have you. I think they would love to be in your situation. I think they'd love to have planned the way you had going back. This is my take on it, 30 and 40 years ago. So I think the fact that you've had so much continuity, the fact that you've been thinking forward, thinking like this and setting up these policies, they put you in a lot better stead. I don't think it's too much. No, I think it's, again, remember this, as you know, every one of these projects that are built, they have to have, again, continuous renewal and replacement, and especially when, if you think about it, there will be effectively a build out in Loudoun County. It may take another 20 or 25 years, but there is that, there is that build out of roughly 500,000-600,000 residents basically. So what we are shooting for, what you're set up for, is to get to that day, even though I suspect very few of us will be around in 30 years here at the board. I certainly won't. But the reality is you're putting yourself in a position that you're able then to continue to maintain and to reinvest in the system. So I think that's you want to continue the progress in this way. That would be my take. I don't know, Brian, maybe you want to add to that.
I would agree with that and just remind you that part of your rates is designed to recover 50% of depreciation so that we're in a better position for the R&R later.
So when you look at net revenues going out 5 years, this is a 5-year plan of financing. Are we contemplating continue user rate increases? I know we're gonna have our last one this year, but does the model
Yes,
assume that we're doing 3%?
yes, the model itself assumes 3% with, you're correct. We'll do another rate study next year.
And then just to follow up, have we stress test this, for lack of a better term, this 5-year plan of financing? I know availability charges aren't gonna go away, but we're so reliant on the county's assumptions, which could inevitably be completely flawed at some point. So if we looked at, let's say, half of the data centers, based on what we think is gonna happen, half of them went away in 2 or 3 years. Now, I know we see the building plans, so we know that there's gonna be something for the next couple of years, but let's say year 4 and 5, we made an assumption that there was half as many as we had assumed. And the same thing with residential. That, if you look at that number, we used to have 5,000, it's been trending down. And even the data centers, which was 43%, has gone to 34. So there's a trend there. So if you continue that trend down, linearly, what does this plan look like?
We've got that.
You
Yeah,
got-
we're going to talk about that, Mr. Chairman, in just a few minutes. We've actually stress tested it for you, and we've taken it even to the extreme of no data centers.
Okay.
So you'll see what that is, and we'll talk about that. So that's a very good point. But that's something that regularly, sort of, I'll call it behind the curtain. You see here the final product, but when we're looking and seeing what Brian, Sally, and Carla have done, they are constantly stress testing. And so you're seeing, again, a sort of a final product, but you'll see little bits of that in a few moments. So the answer is yes.
One final, and so our debt service, we're not really that concerned about our exposure to increasing in rates. Because that's the other side of this.
No, well, I mean, we have a small variable rate bond. I think there's about 9 million left on that. The rest is all locked in. I mean, obviously, if we went to market now, it would not be.
So we
Great, but-
actually did that variable rate bond strategically back a number of years ago with the thinking that, okay, we needed some debt, fine. But the idea was, why not put ourselves in a position where, yes, variable rate interest might go up, but simultaneously, if it's going up, so too, so we're talking to the chairman before the meeting, so too our investments. And so that actually has been a very good approach for us meaning, Loudon Water is being in that mode. So that's part of it as well. I would think, and Brian, you correct me, Sally, but I suspect 1 year ago, when Loudon Water was doing its budget, they were not probably planning for earnings at the level that we're actually going to see. So that's one of those positives that we don't necessarily account for, when I say meaning fully account for in a good way. So that's part of this, all of this. So from the variable rate, our exposure is literally almost non-existent. Our level of debt, very modest. And at the same time, what you're going to see here, just to give you a sense, this 5-year plan, I'm going by memory, but it's in here. I think we're about 85% is sort of cash funded, roughly. You'll see we have an actual graphic in here, and we're something like 7% is debt funded. So for effectively, we're basically all pay as you go. And that's really strong. Okay, so on page 7, just the credit ratings for everyone's benefit. There really are 3 major credit rating agencies. We don't selectively say, let's get the best ones. That's not really how it works in our industry. It's the 3 agencies or firms are Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. We've had them all for years. We're at the highest level you can be for all of them. That's the AAA. You'll see the way they show it. Moody's has 1 capital A, 2 small A's. That's just the way they do their nomenclature. The others are big capitals, so it's not a mistake there. I just want to let you point it out. But you can see here, part of what's been so strong for us, and their points is that they talk about on the next page how strong the management is. I really mean that. You cannot be in this position without management that is doing the stress testing, management that understands really how all this pulls together. And of course, you're staying with all of these policies that are very, very good. And later on, I'm going to show you how these policies compare to your neighbors, if you would, other AAAs and sort of national indices. And you're going to see you compare very favorably. So page 8 is actual quotes on the left-hand side from credit strengths, right-hand side credit challenges. I'm just going to speak off of them for a minute. And you can see there, they talk about well-seasoned management. By the way, when they talk about management, they're not just talking about the folks on this side of the table, they're talking about you as well. They view management as boards, finance committees. What you're doing today, having a 5-year plan, discussing a 5-year plan, reviewing it, that's part of management. And they're cognizant of that. They ask us when we have rating meetings, do you have a 5-year plan? Do you do pro forma? They see all of this. So this report, they'll actually see this. The other points they make there in, again, to one of your colleagues there, they talk on that third bullet about, again, extremely strong. That 1.6, as they look at it, they call that extremely strong. And then again, on the right-hand side, they say our debt is slightly higher than rated utilities and we're a little smaller than national medians. I always struggle with that a little bit, frankly, but again, the systems they're comparing us to, you'll see are again, massive systems. But nevertheless, we are a very sizable system. It's not as if we're, okay, a boutique system by any means. So again, and they're constantly monitoring that, in effect, that debt service covered absent the availability charges. And that's been the case forever. And that's, they point out, is again, challenge. But challenge is all relative. When they call it a challenge and yet they still have you for year in and year out as AAA and stable, I think we want to make sure it's a good balance. So, okay.
Debt burden higher than similarly rated utilities.
So what they're saying is they view your debt historically, because right, again, going forward, the amount of debt we're doing is very, very modest. But there was a time, and this again, we're still sort of, swallowing, if you would, the sort of the snake swallowing the rat. We're kind of going towards the end of that. But there was a time when we had a far higher reliance on debt than we do now. And that's really on the wane, if you think about it. So from that, my perspective, that's just going to continue.
Ratio is like debt to our assets. I mean, how are they coming up with that?
So they do. There's some ratios that they have. They just compare, again, debt to the overall revenues of a system to assets. They do a variety of ways. And we've actually done, we could certainly always provide this, Mr. Chairman, but we've done some more presentations over the years to staff where we go into some more details about some of those. And we certainly every year, roughly every year, when we're meeting with the rating agencies, whether it's telephonically or by, even meetings in person, which has been a while, we show what those look like and how those have trended. So they're moving in the right direction.
Price Fitch still has noted the authority's dependence on availability fees. There's still somewhat dependence, and I know Moody's was the last one to give us the AAA because of that. And once we flip to predictable, reliable operating revenue and so forth, then I'm surprised to still see that comment up there there is some dependence on it, but
Yeah, again, you're right. When you're showing that you're twice the level without it. But think about this, when they look at this authority, this entity, you think about it, you've had so many connection fees for so long. It's been part of the overall revenues of the system. I think I feel like they have to say something to that commentary. I kind of get it, but at the same time, it's interesting. Fitch has always been a little bit more of a black box than I think Moody's and S&P from our perspective, and they're the last ones to have as our rating, not necessarily as AAA, but as our rating. So again, want to make sure, and this is important, that any of yours or your colleagues' trepidation, my job here is to give a relative order of magnitude of trepidation, and it's probably a 1 out of a 10. It's really very, very low. But again, we're not taking things for granted. And I think the fact that you're seeing in a moment here how we're able to absorb literally $160 million increase from one year to the next and not slow things down is demonstrated the strength of the overall system. So,
I mean, the two really, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
The two really big picture things that are always in the back of my mind is historically utilities run out of money. Like all utilities. So there's like that in the background. That's really big picture, over time. The second thing is Loudon is continuing to slow.
Right.
And I don't see any change in that direction. And all of the proposed changes not all of it, a lot of the proposed changes in this new zoning rewrite could very well have a significant chilling effect on even the development that we have. Both on residential and then also on the data centers, but more the residential side. But so in my mind, I'm just going, okay, I see the availabilities going, and then it's just a question of, well, what does that do to the user rate? And, I see their note here, look, people have money here. We could essentially raise rates if we need to, and people can still afford it. That's what I'm reading into that. Okay, sure. But then I go, what's the sensitivity of that? Residential gets cut in half, plus we have all this rate increase, the macro in the country.
Mhm.
Housing has never been more unaffordable since we started keeping track of it. That's not a good sign for the housing market. It gives you only one direction to go, which is down. And so all of those things, I mean, that's again, very, very big picture. But in my mind, those are the things that I have.
No, you make great points, and I don't just say that, you do. I think that's part of why we're constantly looking at the overall authority and financially. And the stress testing is considerable. Like I said, you asked about data centers, and you're going to see the stress test here, and it shows what happens to cash. At the same time, and you correct me, Brian, but when we look at the model going forward, we not only had the 3% increases, but we've also projected continuing 3% increases. And to a point here, affordability, I mean, think about it. Inflation this past year was around 9 or 10%. And we didn't expect that 2 years ago. At least I didn't expect that. I'm not an economist. But even I was, I'm not sure I would have expected it. But the point is, I was a chemist, by the way, so not an economist. But that said, again, if we continually do this kind of review, and Brian's point is a critical one, we put away real dollars in depreciation. So from the day that ends, and the day that for whatever reason there's no such thing as data centers, maybe it's something we can't comprehend. But if let's say it's not there, our focus is to make sure that our debt is really low at that point, and it will be. All right. And the dollars in depreciation is there. So we've got the cash flow. We're still going to probably have to do things relative to inflation. Okay. It's just a given. But we're not going to all of a sudden have a big due bill. I think that's the key here is we're moving away from having, and we've been doing that for years. When I started with y'all, we didn't have that choice. We just had to be building stuff. We'd be building these massive facilities like the one next door, and took on a bunch of debt as well as pay a lot of cash. But now we're a much more mature system. You still have things to do. So I feel like the evolution here for what you were concerned about, we're not going to avoid any of it, but we're going to be able to mitigate as much as humanly possible. I feel that way. And again, year in and year out, there may be some more additional information you want the staff or us to prepare for y'all, we can do that. So.
And also what's important is we do this review every year. So
Mhm.
it's not like we're doing it now and then we're not going to revisit it for 5 years.
Exactly.
So there's going to be some massaging of, there'll be more data points. We'll know how much we're spending on the capital improvement. We'll know what ERCs are, so we can make adjustments as we go along.
Exactly.
Yeah, when we meet with the agencies, the things that they really like are that we do this every year. We do rate studies every 3 years and have shown a willingness to increase our rate. They like that we have a 10-year CIP and they can see projects progress. And then they really like, recently, Jessica did the 100-year, and even though that's, 100 years, they like that we're looking at that. And so all of those things give them assurances that we're preparing in case of these scenarios.
So really great
Mhm.
answers. Obviously we're good for 5 years. I mean, we're like all the short term. It's the longer, and I know this is a 5-year plan of finance, not the 100-year plan of finance, but it's the stuff that
Mhm.
comes in the future. But this is all, I think those are all great.
And I'll just finish and move on to another section, but think of it this way. It may be 5 or 100 years, but when it's looked at every single year, as the chairman said, that's the greatest strength that we have, is just constantly asking ourselves, what has changed? Why has it changed? And how have we reacted to that change? So I think it's the best we can possibly do.
I agree with you.
So go to page 10, if you would. Let's just go to our cash balance policy. Drilling down a little bit, as I indicated. So on the left-hand side, that is our policy, is to be at least equal to 2, upwards to 3 times the rolling average of annual operating and maintenance expenditures. Again, it says plus debt service. So this was adopted, hard to believe, almost a decade ago. And again, it has been the type of thing that we look at year to year, and it gives us some sense of when we maybe sometimes have to go to the bond market to make sure that we don't go below those critical numbers. Now, as a banker, as you indicated, 2 times is very solid, but we're talking about being in rarefied air. We're talking about being AAA rated. Most systems that are not AAA rated, they're not looking at something like this. It's just not the way it is. So again, it's all relative to the bar that we've set. No pun intended. We've set a very high bar, and part of why we did that goes to your point of what happens if something happens dramatically, changes quickly. We've got the dollars there to certainly adjust over a year or two period of time. So
Our cash balances now are over 300. When you look at this chart.
that's at least there.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Higher.
Okay, so go to page 11. We've got, as you know, 2 debt service coverage policies. And that first one here is that one I pointed out, the 1.5 times coverage when it includes the availability charges. And that's the whole point here. To be over 4 times is really strong. And that's not sure that's a technical term, mine really, but it's considerable. How's that? And the rating agencies point that out. But again, what happens when the music stops? Let's go to the next page. And that is, where are we when we take out the availability charges? And again, back in 2018, we adopted this. I will tell you, if it's any help, we started with policies back in 1984, 85 timeframe, maybe a little bit later, actually we did our first financing of any note about 1989. And we had some policies to talk to the rating agencies then. So we have strengthened those policies. We've come a long way since that period of time. So again, this could be further strengthened over time to take care of, again, if there's a radical change in the way the county is looking at things, we have that ability. So we've continued to adopt and adapt, if you would. So once again, really strong position here. Okay, so let's go to page 13. And this is telling. It is where we are to get to the modeling. And first above there is the revenue and expense assumptions. You'll see here, you'd asked about this. Back in November of 21, the board adopted the 3% rate increases through 2024. And then, as we mentioned, and I said earlier, and Brian did, we have projected those same 3% in 25 out through 27. So we have done that as part of the model. It's fair to say, Brian, they'll have a choice to decide yes or no on it, but that's how the model has been set up. Okay. And Stantec, of course, has been doing your rate studies. We work closely with them in many places, including here. We think they're quite good and they understand the system. They understand Virginia, and of course, they understand nationally all of this. Then the last bullet point here is the ERCs, the connections. And a lot of those connections are tied to the databases, to the data centers, excuse me. And you'll see we actually have a percentage we'll give you in a page or so about that. But again, the high water mark was back in 2019, and it looks it's coming down, but it's looking pretty steady, at least projection wise, out through the next several years. But
Why aren't our projections for ERCs more conservative than I see here? I mean, are we just piggybacking off with the county things?
Yes, those are actually, the county decreased those recently, and these are in line with the new county projections. Yep.
Seems like they seem overly aggressive to me, but that's just an opinion. It's not based on any fact. But
I'll tell you one thing, Mr. Chairman, it's interesting you say that. Historically, though, my colleagues here, your colleagues here have historically been on the conservative side. Because again, you'll see in a moment, the data centers actually account for a lot of those connections in terms of percentage. So you'll see that in a minute. Let me get to that. In fact, page 15, if we would. Okay. So the point is, in 2022, on that page, it says 34% of the authority's availability charges are from the data centers. So if you think about it, basically a third of that ERCs are data centers and 2/3 are going to be residential of some type. You can see where it's been over the last 4 years, about 45%. And then what we've done, as I said earlier, is we've said to ourselves, okay, what happens to the cash balances with data centers or cold turkey without data centers? So you can see there, we're not going, and I say we're not, I'll take this liberty. We're not going to be in front of you, like you said, every 5 years. We're coming every year. We're not going to get to the point in 2027 where there's no data centers and we're down to $25 million of cash. That's just not how we've ever done this. But we're showing you, to your question earlier, I think, what happens if there is no data centers? What happens then? What's interesting, though, on the right-hand side is coverage, debt service coverage still remains well above the requirement. If you'll notice there. So we've got a lot going on this page. But again, this is the type of thing that allows us to look at this year to year. And that also, and you correct me, Brian, does not take into consideration, even if we went all the way down there, does that not take into consideration slowing or amending the capital
I would
program?
assume there would be some.
Exactly. So we've acted as if, in the fair say,
Mhm.
we've acted as if the capital program continues to move
Mhm.
as if nothing changed. And that wouldn't be the case either. And we've had some instances, by the way, where we've slowed or amended the capital program. And a lot of times what we've seen in that regard is when we had to do debt, that slowed down. That's what I alluded to earlier. It just might take 1 or 2, 3 years later that we actually do what was planned to be a debt issuance, all because we were able to adjust our capital program.
So if I read this correctly, what it's saying is that without the data center revenue, our cash position would be severely restricted, but we would still be able to maintain our debt service coverage ratios because of our net revenues would be enough to sustain.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We would be though in violation of some of our cash covenants.
We would.
And then, so what would we do? We just have to issue more debt to?
I can, yeah, go ahead.
Well, we would look at rates as well, because we would need to, if we need to cover operating expenses, then your rates would go up. But if we needed to cover for capital spending, then yes, we would issue new money.
And again, that goes back to the point is you notice here, if this dries up the data centers, we're going to have a couple of years to really see
Mhm.
how it's and why. I mean, so I mean this, I'm not concerned about us not being able to adapt. I can't speak to whether or not data centers will continue, but I can speak to the fact that we'll be adapting.
The Loudon system is still relatively young. And at some point, the demand for replacement, repairs and so forth, is going to start to increase. Is that baked in somewhere? Okay.
That
I know
goes-
we've always planned for that, but it just, at some point, I think that's going to take over the CIP. in the future.
That goes to the depreciation
Right.
that Brian and
Yeah.
I were talking about is we really have, to their credit, starting with Carla, now with Brian and Sally will follow through here. We have always asked ourselves the question, how are we going to be able to adjust when the growth, the music stops, when all the chairs are taken away? And that's why I feel like you've done such a good job in terms of planning and putting depreciation and having that cash flow available. So that's not lost on any of us, never has been lost on any of us.
And
Okay,
it's gonna happen. It's
Yeah.
going to happen.
Yes, it
No
will.
doubt about it. At some point, there'll be a black swan, whether it's some technology that replaces data centers, at some point that's gonna end.
Yeah, I would say, Carla, I don't think we ever knew about data centers, did we, 15 years ago or 10? I mean, I'm just asking.
No, not really. And we
Yeah.
didn't, they weren't in the growth projections. So this has sort of been a blessing in disguise, but not fooling us into thinking that it's going to last forever. So, but I'm going to get in my, sounds defensive plug, my annual plug that, even though there is this dependence on availability charges or perception of the dependence on availability charges, Loud and Water has never depended on those for the operations of our system, right? That has always been our user rates. And so what we're kind of getting to here is with the availability charges, it's not just simply they reduce or they go away. There's all kinds of other things that have to happen then, right? It is a relook at our capital program, which is what we used to present to the rating agencies as well. Look, if we are down to 500 connections, these are all the other things that we have to do. So, and again, we've said it before, this is why we look at it every year. And even when we do a mid-year projection, because of these data centers and the anomaly of that, we do that mid-year reforecast. It kind of gets plugged back in here too to say, okay, are we still where we said we were going to be? And we've been able to kind of weather those ups and downs. So I think we're in a good spot.
Yeah, I thought it would be appropriate point to just mention, last fall we were before the board with one of our biggest capital programs, the Phase 3 expansion for Broad Run. And I think that's a prime example of where we looked at phasing opportunities in that large program that would speak to, what Brian and the team here is saying, that we have the ability to be nimble and adjust as need be.
So we've got those levers to pull, is what we're saying, that if we find these things unfolding in this kind of way, we go, fine, we just throttle back all the spending and you go, rates still cover operations. And so we're good. Just an observation. I mean, we're 50% off of 2019's highs with ERCs. And obviously that was a spike. And I think, was that because we were raising rates the next year? Is that why we got a spike in 2019?
We did see a significant amount of connections come in December
So that brought
that year.
forward
Right.
some of 2020s. Yeah. Yeah, but so, and we're at 34% was data centers out of the ERCs. It was a third in 2022. And are we expecting something like a third in 2023, or is it more like 45%, this average that we have?
So the historical percentages are accurate. The ERC connections for 2023 going forward are all based on the county numbers, which do not include data centers. That's all supposed to be just housing numbers. And so we're using the percentages just as an assumption on how to reduce what our connections will be. So I'm not sure what our percentage of data center connections will
We
look
can see,
like this year.
see permits, right? So we know.
We do track that. And then it's just a variation of how fast they actually.
So in terms.
Well, we
of
see
that's-
permits, but we're also very involved as a referral. We're very engaged with the county and the developers in that. So we're seeing that coming, as you're suggesting.
Mhm.
Exactly.
But in other words, do we have an internal estimate for how many data centers we think we'll have this year based on all the things you guys just said?
Yes, but I don't remember what it is, but we can get that for you. Yes.
And I was with somebody the other day, and, my understanding is that everybody's still building these data centers and moving forward, even though they have no electricity. And so they're going, well, we'll just sit on this thing for 2 years. We're still getting permits. We're still right. But I wonder how long that continues. Maybe it continues. I don't know. I don't know that business
Maybe they
that
start
well.
building them somewhere else,
Well, maybe so. I know Prince William's competing for it.
There's a lot of places around the state that they're starting to move data centers into, really working hard. In fact, even you see that the governor's office, VEDP, is trying to spread the data centers around to other places in the state, even very rural places, interestingly enough. So.
But do we understand the electricity thing? I don't. I don't understand the impact that's having on data centers here.
Yeah, we've been following it, and I think there's been some particular corridors that has been most critical in. I don't think it's an issue in the JLMA, which is where we're seeing a lot of activity. So we've been tracking that. I don't recall some of the detail beyond that, but our staff has been tracking the detail on that.
So you're not concerned then that that's going to have an effect on the data centers coming online over this 5-year period, for instance? You don't think the electricity issue is going to really affect that?
I don't think in a sudden way, no.
I mean, more realistically, probably what's gonna happen is, what's happened to land values here. They just are gonna start looking somewhere else because of the economics of it. And we don't have any, we're not gonna have any land left, so it's just, the writing's on the wall that we're gonna continue to see the trend decrease, I would think.
Well, oh, go ahead.
Well, one thing I was gonna, I think and everybody's been saying this, we're constantly looking at this full picture. As you guys are saying, this kind of trend downward, but at the same time, for years, we've been talking about there's this build out in Loudoun County and it's kind of out there. And yet at the same time, in the last 4 years, with the addition of the boundary for that build out is a policy boundary. It's not it's not a political boundary in terms of the county. And so all of a sudden in the last 4 years, the JLMA has been added to us. There was some significant area of the transition policy area with the P1, P2 area that we've kind of talked about. Most recently, this area that we've referred to over time as the donut hole down in Evergreen Mill Road and Ryan Road. That's allowed central system. So even the target of this build out concept we've talked about has actually changed over the last 4 years. And there's the potential that may or may not. And it might be incremental, might be bigger areas, small areas. So it's kind of both ends. We're trying to continue to watch that and have that nimble kind of approach both ways.
One other thing, and I don't know if you factor this in, but I think it's way off in the future, but with Metro now finally here, we've got transit-oriented development around those stations, much higher density. So at some point, way off in the future, that'll start to kick in as well.
Yeah, the county wants more affordable homes,
Right, exactly.
but the ordinance changes they're proposing increase the mandatory number of ADUs builders have to build,
That's right.
just even without a rezoning.
Right.
But there's been no increase in overall density or incentives or anything. So if you're a builder, you're running a pro forma on some piece of land and you just go, okay, every time all these ADUs, you build them at a loss. It's not even break even. It's at a loss. It's a negative. And you go, and I've got nothing to offset that. So when you talk to the builders here, they just go, it's not going to pencil. We just don't build. I mean, unless you'll have a vested approval, like maybe Claude Moore, they're all vested, they're zoned, Silver District West. Okay, fine. But in terms of like new approvals, new subdivision, it's just going to have the exact opposite effect that the county's intending for it to happen. And it'll take some years for the county to realize, oh, what we intended, we're actually doing the opposite. And then you got to go and amend new policies, new ordinances, all that'll take years. So that's one of my concerns here, because this is 2/3 of our availability revenue is non-data centers. And it's, unless they change, I mean, they're going to adopt this ordinance in the summer. And unless they,
Or we think.
well,
Yeah.
they're pretty committed to it. Maybe it's September, but
Yeah.
it's going to get adopted. And my concern is that it has the opposite effect. And unless they change it, it absolutely will have the opposite effect. And I'm not sure that it's going to get changed. There's always too much hubbub around all of it. But that could affect us for some years when all of a sudden residential just dries up.
One of the things that I'm hearing too, that we'll bring back to you, and I know that we have it, Brian, you indicated, what that data center revenue projection is over probably 3 years. I'm not sure we would have it out to that 5 because of the uncertainty. But we can give you an idea of what that would be as part of this plan. Again, not built into those growth projections, but hopefully something that comes to fruition over that time.
And just to wrap that up, I know you guys have always been conservative and it shows, but I think we still need to be conservative on these ERC numbers more so than they are here, just from a stress test standpoint. I know we redo it every year, but that would be my last tidbit.
Okay. So if we go to page 17, capital plan, I think this will be helpful. And again, this is something that's been provided to us, but we're just putting it pen to paper, if you would. And as I mentioned, we understand the plan's up by some $160 million rounding off. And you could see really where the years that capital is considerably higher than what was planned. It's those out years, 25, 26, 27. So just to point that out.
You know what the problem is?
Yeah.
It's the CIP committee.
Yeah. Somehow I get the sense, Mr. Chairman, that's not the same committee as the Finance Committee. I'm kidding. No, okay. All right. So, but page 18 is really a great strength. And I said earlier, I was going by memory. So your funding of all this is about 84% cash. That's as high as I will tell you in my experience. We have 650, give or take, clients. I did a little question, not formally. I kept it out of emails and internet. I said, can anybody tell me if they've seen a cash funding of we'll call it a very material system that's 84%, above 80%, and nobody was able to match that. So it goes to your point. When you're using this much cash and planning, even if the cash is slower and even if the ERCs are slower, our ability to pivot, I think is solid. May not be easy. It may not be the ability to do 3% going forward. At some point it may be more, but again, this is a real strength, and I want to make sure the committee recognizes that and doesn't think, well, it's somewhat normal. Wrong's word, so typical. This is really very, very helpful to us. Okay.
Outside funding, what does that include?
10 million of it is the FEMA pre-mitigation disaster grant for the reservoir, and the rest is reimbursement from Loudoun County. 3 million of it is ARPA funding that we received last month, I believe, for the Paonian Springs project, and the rest is for other water and wastewater programs.
10 million from FEMA and the balance is reimbursement from the county. Correct.
I make one last point here. The 21 bonds, the 34 million, the next bond issue out in basically the 2026 year. It's interesting. It's somewhat akin to that, yet is inflation and what have you. So I don't want to say that's the absolute number and that's the absolute year, but you're not seeing some, no pun intended, some material jump in debt. It's really, in fact, if anything, it's a smaller percentage than what it was when we did this several years ago and projected what was then going to be the 21 bond issue.
Mhm.
So again, take that to heart. Just a couple more pages and I'll be wrapping up. Page 19, you can see what your debt portfolio looks like. So if you think about it, overall, it'll grow to slightly above 20 million when the new debt kicks in. We're talking about 30-year level debt, 5%. Those are benchmarks. One point I'd make, you see systems like yours very often, not surprising, you see a 40-year debt. Some of the AAAs will do that. We don't need to do that. We're not suggesting doing that, but you'll notice how much it drops down, very significant drop down. It's going to inevitably allow us to layer in for what would be, again, that next wave of improvements, particularly as the system, I'll call it, gets very mature by the end of, 2045, that period of time. Again, it's allowing us to layer in debt for what at that point might be far more than, new projects, but rather it might be, aging pipes, things of that nature that went in some, 70 years earlier, back in the 1980s and the 1990s at that point. So goes to your point, we're thinking about this. It moves down in a way that we like to layer in for the future.
So this is not total debt, it's just debt service, this chart.
It is total debt service,
Okay.
and it's the dark green is your existing debt, which is your total debt. The light green is this new project, this 2026 bond issue. So the point here is when there's subsequent issues, let's say in 2030 or 2035 or whatever, that'll be able to be layered in. And we've got a lot of room and ability. Think of it this way, if I could. Let's assume we're at 2035 or so. That debt service is half of what it's going to project it to be. So if you think of it this way, that half, that's roughly a $12 million of freed up debt capacity. 12 million, that allows us to borrow something like $180 million and not go above the debt service levels of 2027, 2028. So from that perspective, again, we have this ability to take on considerable debt down the road, whether it's for new projects or renovations or improvements. And that's the whole point here. We're not dropping off slowly. We're dropping off quite rapidly. And that's by design.
Great.
Yeah, it really is good. Okay. Just a couple more pages, page 20. You can see here some projections using the $35 million there. And if we see, again, we look at the limits, you can see our cash balances. This is if things go according to plan. You'll find that, again, we're going to be right there at the lower limits of 2027. I think you said it best, Mr. Chairman. We've historically been very conservative. Every time we've shown something like this, we've always been better than that. We really have, for any number of reasons. Whether it's earnings that we don't plan, whether it's even better ERCs that come in, whether it's a little slower in terms of capital, what have you. But again, this is allowing us to see when we'd have to do some more things. And again, it's at that 3% rate increases. All right. So lastly, I promised we'd give you a little bit of peer comparisons. So what we did on page 22, you could see where we are here in Virginia and then Mid-Atlantic, Southeastern states and some others. And we compared ourselves to them as well as some national indices. So if we go to just pages 23 and 24 and 25, there's some comparatives, all right? And you can see here our total annual debt service coverage, it's above those AAA medians. And when you look below at all the other AAAs of 14, we're right in the thick of it. So as I said, we look solid. And that's with the availability charges. So again, but these are the best of the best. I think, again, we're comparing ourselves to AAA systems. There are literally untold numbers of lower systems throughout the country. These are the best of the best. And then annual debt service coverage, page 24, when we strip out those availability fees, once again, we're right in the thick of the medians. And we're probably in the sort of the bottom third, if you would, of the other AAAs, but we're very much in line with them. And I think it's interesting. You'll notice here, again, we look good and we keep even getting stronger under page 24. Okay. Lastly here, days cash on hand. That's the point, 2022. We're right there in the thick of it all, but in 2027, we're going to go very much down to that lower end of our ratio. I would argue and believe that with us talking about this annually, we will probably not go down to that level, but we'll see. But
Why
at
does
least,
Chesterfield have so much money?
so we actually work with Chesterfield. That just happens to be right now a moment in time for them. A lot of that is going to be spent. So we're not in that mode working with them where we say, you know what, let's keep about 8, 9 years of cash. We're not. So I just want to point that out. Okay. Sometimes you see things like that. But suffice it to say, I'll tell you what, give me a year or two. I won't say it won't be immediate, but in a year or two, if not faster, it'll be coming down. So,
Is Prince William's a little larger than us?
Carly, you'd know better than I would. I would.
Slightly larger, but not much more. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Right.
But they've got a little bit stronger cash position than we do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not feeling competitive.
It's about, it's about the same.
They're a little ahead. You see that?
Yeah, I guess.
They're a little ahead.
Look at that.
Days cash on hand, up above the rating agencies, that's 2022 median.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes. And it may be 2021, but basically we try to
But not
use the most.
2027, yeah.
No, it's just, we try to use what they give us. Again, they publish these things and that what they do is they just take audits. So chances are by the time, if we've gotten it, which is, we'll call it fresh data, it's probably a combination of 2021 data. I'm just going to speculate if we've got it, just because the timing it takes them to pull it together. But they don't get into too much of that detail. So again, there you have it. And if you talk about competitive though, I will say, so we also do, Henrico, of course, is their neighbor, just like you are to Prince William. And Henrico is very well run. So I think the point is Henrico looks more like we do. And that's so I will think that Chesterfield, I don't work with them day in and day out, but we'll get more like Henrico by the time it's over. So, all right. So
Williams at 6 times annual debt service coverage. Is that just normal for them? That's the page 23. That's with availability fees, but they're at 6x.
they apparently are. Yes, I don't work on day in, day out with
Huh?
them.
Is there, I mean, they're as mature as we are.
They're actually more
Or-
mature.
Or
They're
more,
they're
yeah.
actually more
Because they've had
mature, yeah.
Quantico, right? Do they serve Quantico?
They do. They were like a combination back in the early 80s. They were a combination of 4 or 5 different, we'll call it service districts, I remember those. So, and Quantico was one of them. And interestingly enough, just shows you how much they've changed. One of them actually went into default in the very early 80s. That's part of what got them to kind of come together and become a service authority and join together. So come a long way.
And I know we don't have, Fairfax County on here or, I don't know, DC Water or whatever, but presumably are they, I guess they're not AAA rated? Is that what this suggests or?
I don't know per se, DC Water, I don't think they are. I don't think they are. Because they've had some split ratings. They've done well, but they're just clearly not. And they're also, but for whatever reason, they're not part of that group that we've been given.
Well, and there's just, Fairfax Water is only water only. Fairfax County handles sewer. With Prince William, they're only wholesale on the water side. I don't know.
It's not apples to apples.
Yeah, I think a little bit of that. There's some differences.
But they are well run though. I mean, DC Water is now well run. So we were talking about that earlier.
Train wreck.
It's a great town. Yeah.
No.
I'll say it. I used to live out there. I can say that.
So, Brian, I'll turn to you, I guess, the last thing.
Yeah, so with that, we're to, AJ, would you mind pulling up the, thank you. So we're to the recommended motion. Certainly happy to answer any other questions that you may have at this point.
They were good on the questions.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. I move the committee endorse the 5-year plan of finance as presented and forward to the board for approval in April.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Action item on the,
Yeah, I think
it's probably a pretty big thing. I mean, I don't think, we don't need to have this in depth. And obviously we'll endorse it and I'll endorse it when I give the finance summary, but I think it's a big number,
Mhm.
so
Sure.
I think
it's
it's
typically accurate.
worth having a presentation. Action. All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
very
Mr.
much,
Chairman,
Mr.
members.
Rogers, AJ.
Thanks.
The button pushing was excellent. All right,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
The next item, is the financial summary by Sally. Sally?
Yes, we're talking about February financial results. So operating revenues totaled 19.5 million, which is 3 million above our forecast. Non-operating revenues are also above forecast, 8.3 million versus 6.5 million. The expenses are 0.8 million below forecasts, so we're coming in at 23.3. And then capital contributions totaled 6.2 million in February. So that's revenues and expenses. Well, we're not really in line there. And then ERCs as of February were 388. And to remind everybody, we're forecasted at 2350 for the year. And then capital expenditures we talked about yesterday, but the one shown is at 58, but if we factor in the invoice that came in May and the correction of the formula, we are pretty much on target as of February.
Things look good, as usual,
So far,
so far.
so far.
Does anyone have any questions on the numbers? Okay. All right. Next meeting is
27th,
April.
27th.
It'll be flowers blooming everywhere. We should have it outside.
I will note, Mr. Chairman, that Terry the Lesser did a phenomenal job reporting out the Finance Committee at the board meeting.
I was online. I did listen to that. It was very, very astute. Thank you very much. All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion adjourned.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.